Good evening, everyone. Sat Sri Akal, Adab. Welcome to Maja House, Amritsar. Maja House is our home, but it's a home with a difference because we've opened up our private space to the public and we invite audiences to come and enjoy some scintillating conversations and contrary and provocative debates and discussions. We ask them to come enjoy the poetry that people bring to the stage here and performances of dance and dastangoi and various other forms of cultural practice. And all of this is done in a spirit of liberal, open, and very nuanced informality, which encourages you to come and to listen and to participate and make this place your own. And difficult as it has been these past many months, ever since Corona attacked us and we went into the first lockdown, and consequently, so many waves of the disease, but also so much else that has happened in our country and of course across the world. But we've tried to keep this spirit alive, and we've been doing this through online sessions ever since April 2020. The platform that we are all on today, Sanja Punjab, is a precious platform because it's here that we talk about our shared cultural and literary heritage. And it's a place where the East and the West Punjab meet. And we try to build fresh bonds and to also strengthen our continuing friendships and our centuries old ties. So I'd like to welcome all of you to Sanja Punjab this evening. It's a program that is curated by Dr. Arvinda Chamak, who's here with us and who's our host for the evening also. He's going to introduce our guest speaker, our guest author, Ranjit Powar, Dr. Ranjit Powar, who's here from Chandigarh, and the two discussants whom we have, Professor Gurupdesh Singh and Dr. Gurpratap Khairah. Welcome all of you, and thank you once again for being part of this session. Gurpratap and Gurupdesh, of course, are also part of the Maja House executive. So this is a doubly pleasing session as far as I'm concerned, because we are all here in strength. The book, which also Arvindaji will talk about, is of course about life in pre-partition Punjab and describes to a great extent the syncretic culture that existed here. And so let's take a step back into time and get into this discussion. Arvindaji, over to you now.
Thank you so very much, Preeti ji. I'm humbled and I'm honored to have so many illuminaries today. ਜਦੋਂ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੀ ਜ਼ਾਤ ਦਾ ਕੁਝ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਵਾਪਸ ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੁਝ ਟੁੱਟ ਕੇ ਵਿਖਰਿਆ ਹੋਵੇ। ਤਕਸੀਮ ਦੇ ਵੇਲੇ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਮੈਂ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਉਸ ਤਕਸੀਮ ਦਾ ਦਰਦ ਜਿਸ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ Dusk over the mustard fields, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੱਕ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਸ਼ਾਹਕਾਰ ਹੈ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਪਵਾਰ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਲਿਖੀ, ਦੋ ਕਿਰਦਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਝਲਕੀਆਂ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਨਸਲਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੇਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹਦਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਔਖਾ ਹੈ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਦਰਦ ਨੂੰ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਕਰਨਾ ਅਦਰਵਾਈਜ਼ ਬੜਾ ਔਖਾ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਪਵਾਰ ਨੇ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਤੇ ਤਵਾਰੀਖ ਤੇ ਕਲਚਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਸੀ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਵਾਪਸ ਰਿਵਾਈਵ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ। ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਆਰਮੀ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਸੀ ਜਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਸੋਲਜਰਸ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਆਰਮੀ ਦੇ ਥੱਲੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਦਰਦ ਕੀ ਸੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ, ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਟੱਬਰ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਫੈਮਲੀਜ਼ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ। ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੁਣ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਪਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਝਾਤ ਪਾਓਗੇ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਬੈਨਰ ਥੱਲੇ, ਜਿਹਦਾ ਮੁੱਖ ਮਕਸਦ ਦੋਵਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੋੜਨਾ, ਇੱਕ ਬ੍ਰਿਜ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਅਮਨ ਮੁਹੱਬਤ ਦਾ ਪੈਗਾਮ ਦੇਣਾ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੰਨ 47 ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ 9 ਮਾਸ ਦੇ ਰਿਸ਼ਤੇ ਵਾਂਗ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਸੀ, ਸਾਡੇ ਤਿਉਹਾਰ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਸਨ, ਸਾਡੇ ਦੁੱਖ ਸੁੱਖ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਸਨ, ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਸਾਂਝਾਂ ਇਕੱਠੀਆਂ ਸਨ, ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਪਿੰਡ ਦੀਆਂ ਛੇਬਰਾਂ ਇਕੱਠੀਆਂ ਸਨ, ਖੁੰਡ ਚਰਚਾ ਇਕੱਠੀ ਸੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਮੁੜ ਉਸ ਥਾਂ ਤੇ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਸਕੀਏ। ਰਣਜੀਤ ਪਵਾਰ ਜੀ is a wonderful soul, ਇਹ ਸਾਈਕੋਲੋਜਿਸਟ ਨੇ, ਸਪੀਕਰ ਨੇ ਐਂਡ ਪੈਸ਼ਨੇਟ ਰਾਈਟਰ ਨੇ। ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਵਾਬਸਤਗੀ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਮਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਪੜ੍ਹਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਏ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਉਣ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਏ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਲਿਖਣ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਏ, ਚਾਹੇ ਸੁਣਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਏ। ਔਰ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਇਹ ਜਲੰਧਰ ਦੇ ਨੇੜੇ ਇੱਕ ਪਿੰਡ ਮਿੱਠਾਪੁਰ ਦੇ ਰਹਿਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿੱਠਾਪੁਰ ਦੀ ਮਿਠਾਸ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਾਣੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਖਸੀਅਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਝਲਕਦੀ ਹੈ। ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਚੰਡੀਗੜ੍ਹ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਿਰਕਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਚੰਡੀਗੜ੍ਹ ਤੋਂ। ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਇਸਤਕਬਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ। ਇਸ ਬਾਕਮਾਲ ਸ਼ਾਹਕਾਰ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟਰਾਂਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੋਂ, ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਸਿਵਲ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਤੋਂ ਸੀਨੀਅਰ ਸਿਵਲ ਸਰਵੈਂਟ, ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਤਾਰਿਕ ਮਹਿਮੂਦ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ, ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੋਲੋਂ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ ਸਿੱਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਔਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਕੁਝ ਪਲਾਂ 'ਚ ਦੇਖੋਗੇ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦਰਦ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣ ਦੀ। ਟਰਾਂਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਾਰ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਦਾ ਬੇਸਿਕ ਐਸੈਂਸ ਲੂਜ਼ ਕਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ, ਔਰ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਉਰਦੂ 'ਚ ਲਿਖਣ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇਹ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸੁਣਾਇਆ ਹੈ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਪਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ, ਕਿ ਕਿਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਦਰਦ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਿੱਦਤ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਕਿਤੇ ਕਮੀ ਨਾ ਰਹਿ ਗਈ ਹੋਵੇ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਨ ਬਿਨ ਆਡੀਅנס ਤੱਕ, ਪਾਰਟਿਸਪੈਂਟਸ, ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਤੇ ਵਿਊਅਰਸ ਤੱਕ ਤੇ ਰੀਡਰਸ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਸਕੇ। ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਇਸ ਕਨਵਰਸੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਗੁਰਪਦੇਸ਼ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਨੇ। ਇਹ ਫਾਰਮਰ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਨੇ, ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਡਿਪਾਰਟਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਹੈਡ ਆਫ ਦੀ ਡਿਪਾਰਟਮੈਂਟ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੇਵ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਨੇ। ਕਈ 100 PhD ਸਕਾਲਰਸ ਇਹ ਪੈਦਾ ਕਰ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਨੇ, ਔਰ ਆਪ ਵੀ ਪੋਇਟਰੀ ਔਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੁਸੰਨਫ ਨੇ। ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਇਸਤਕਬਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰਤਾਪ ਖੈਰਾ, ਇਹ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਾਗਿਰਦ ਵੀ ਨੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਗੁਰਪਦੇਸ਼ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਰ ਦੇ, ਔਰ ਆਪ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਨੇ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਸਭਾ ਕਾਲਜ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਚਰਚਾ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਮਾਈਕ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਹਵਾਲੇ ਕਰਾਂ, ਇੱਕ ਗੁਜ਼ਾਰਿਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ। ਮੈਂ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਦੇਖ ਰਿਹਾ ਆਡੀਅנס ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਾਈਕਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਅਨਮਿਊਟਡ ਨੇ। ਮੇਰੀ ਗੁਜ਼ਾਰਿਸ਼ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪਲੀਜ਼, ਡਿਸਪਾਈਟ ਮਾਈ ਬੈਸਟ ਐਫਰਟਸ, ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਜ਼ੂਮ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅਲਾਉ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ, ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਪੀਕਰਸ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਅਨਮਿਊਟਡ ਹੀ ਰਹਿਣਗੇ, ਤੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਕਾਈਂਡਲੀ ਸਣੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਊਟ ਕਰ ਲਈਏ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ 1 ਘੰਟੇ ਦੀ ਕਨਵਰਸੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਖਲ ਨਾ ਪਾਈਏ, ਤੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਦੇ ਇਨੀਸ਼ੀਏਟਿਵ ਨੂੰ ਡਸਕ ਓਵਰ ਦ ਮਸਟਰਡ ਫੀਲਡਸ ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਬਖੂਬੀ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਲੈ ਸਕੀਏ। ਸੋ ਓਵਰ ਟੂ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਪਵਾਰ ਜੀ, ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰਤਾਪ ਜੀ ਐਂਡ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਗੁਰਪਦੇਸ਼ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਰ। ਤਾਰਿਕ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਨੂੰ।
ਮੇਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ, ਆਦਾਬ। ਔਰ I am really humbled that all of you who are here today, they have found time to be with me and to give your opinions about my effort, and who have read the message in the story that I wanted to get across. ਔਰ ਉਹਦਾ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਬੇਸਿਕ ਮੈਸੇਜ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪਰਿੰਦਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਮੁਲਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪਰਿੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਖਾਰਦਾਰ ਤਾਰਾਂ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਰੱਖ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ, ਉਹ ਤਾਰਾਂ ਦਿਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣੀਆਂ ਚਾਹੀਦੀਆਂ, ਤੇ ਨਾ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਖੁੱਲੇ ਦਿਮਾਗ ਵਾਲੇ ਤੇ ਪਰਿੰਦਿਆਂ ਵਾਲੀ ਪ੍ਰਵਿਰਤੀ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਹੈ, ਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਣੀਆਂ ਚਾਹੀਦੀਆਂ। ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਤੱਕ ਇੱਕ ਸਾਡੀ ਤਾਰ ਚੱਲੀ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੇ ਧਿਆਨ ਨਾਲ ਸੋਚੀਏ ਤੇ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਸਿਸ ਆਰਟੀਫਿਸ਼ਲੀ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ ਸੀ 1947 ਵਿੱਚ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਡੈਵਸਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਆਈ ਸੀ, ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਗ੍ਰੀਫ ਐਗਨੀ ਆਈ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹਲੇ ਤੱਕ ਉਸ ਨੈਕਸਟ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੱਕ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਲੋਕ ਮੇਰੇ ਵਰਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੈਕਸਟ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਨਹੀਂ, ਬਟ ਉਹ ਇੰਨੀ ਸਮੋ ਗਈ ਸਾਡੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਦਰਦ ਹਲੇ ਤੱਕ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਅੱਗੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਯੁੱਗ ਵਿੱਚ, ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਵਕਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੁਹਰਾਈਏ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਖੌਫਨਾਕ ਕਿਸੇ, ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਖੌਫਨਾਕ ਦਰਦ ਤੇ ਅੱਗ ਦੇ ਦਰਿਆ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਗੁਜ਼ਰਨਾ ਪਵੇ। ਇੱਕ ਇਹ ਮੋਟਿਵ ਸੀ ਜੀ ਮੇਰਾ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਲਿਖਣ ਦਾ। ਦੂਜਾ ਇਹ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਬੜੀ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ, ਸਾਂਝੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਪਿੰਡਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਲਦੀ ਸੀ, ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਦੀ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਜਾਣਦੀ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ। ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਬੜੀ ਇਹ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਕਿ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਰੀਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਡਾਕੂਮੈਂਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗੇ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ। So I have actually depended on oral narratives for this book, in addition to literary research. And also, I would like to tell you interestingly that the whole story is woven from real episodes. Obviously, no names are real and it has been slightly made a little different, but these have all come from oral episodes. And what helped me tremendously was that my father was an officer in the British Indian Army. I spent many happy times with my Nani, my Bibiji, precisely in Saneval, the place where I have actually made the epicenter of my story. So even the visuals that I have described are real to a great extent.
Thank you,
And
Ranjit.
Thank you very much.
Can we begin now?
Yes, I think good. That's a good introduction to the book you have given, Dr. Ranjit Powar. Let me show the book to the audience here, to our friends here. And this is the book that she's talking about. And this is the blurb and the back of it. I think we are not going to make any opinions on this book, as I see. We have enjoyed reading the book, and I think we would like our audience to also enjoy it. It's just to raise the curiosity that the book kind of becomes interesting to our readers. Gurpratap probably would like to start with some kind of an inquiry to make things easy for the audience.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And Ranjit ji, we are delighted that you have taken your time to be with us here today at Maja House. And since your book is coming and the session is under the aegis of Sanja Punjab, where we get in the two Punjabs from India and Pakistan, I would like to start the questions with the basic question about the description of Punjab and the Punjabi life that you have brought to life in your book. Because sometimes the pictures are so vivid and the narrative is so detailed, the description is so detailed. It's sometimes like watching a Manoj Kumar movie like Upkar, you know. वो पुराने गांव की तस्वीरें चलती हैं, लहर चलते हैं, बैल चलते हैं. So I wanted to ask you, how did you research all this? Is this from your own memory or did you do your own research? How did you manage to get so much detail for the book?
a lot of it is from my own childhood memories.
Okay.
In the vacations, I used to come and I used to go to Saneval where my Nani, my Bibiji lived. And I used to spend time with her. So in addition to that, of course, there was research and narratives too.
Yeah, I think we should make our audience know this, that the book, actually it's a fiction, it's a piece of fiction, it's a story, but then it has a very detailed description of the rural life that people had in the pre-partition days. The story is located somewhere in the 40s, I guess. But I think the kinds of things that she has depicted, they remind you of not only your own old days, but even the kind of stories that you heard from your grandma. For example, there is a very beautiful description of the bangle seller if you if you know. And then there is also the beautiful scene of how jaggery is made. And then, of course, there are many other scenes. I don't want to tell everything so that our interest in the book is not kind of lost. These descriptions, in fact, are in the foreground sometimes, but in the background is the bonhomie and the fine relationships and the kind of community life that these three communities had: Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims. All of them lived in complete harmony and peace in those days. I would like you to tell Dr. Ranjit, in what ways do you see our present villages different from the villages that you saw in old days, in those days?
ਗੁਰੂਪਦੇਸ਼ ਜੀ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਬਚਪਨ ਦੀ ਯਾਦ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਹੈਗੀ, ਇੱਕ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੇਵਾਲ ਇਹ ਈਸਟ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਕਿ ਵੈਸਟ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਈਸਟ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਸਾਨੇਵਾਲ ਹੈ ਜੀ, ਔਰ ਇਹ ਡਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟ ਲੁਧਿਆਣੇ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੈਗਾ। ਸੋ as I remember my village at that time, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਵਕਤ ਤੱਕ ਹਲੇ ਇੱਕ ਮਸਜਿਦ ਤੇ ਖੰਡਰ ਵੀ ਖੜੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਔਰ बहुत मिलजुल के उस वेले भी सारे रहंदे सी। Though this is many years later, I am talking about the 60s here, about my childhood. ते उदो तक भी हले जेडी community living सीगी, that was a lot. ते हुण ਉਹ सारा कुछ बदल गया। हुण साडियां villages ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹ urbanized ਹੋ ਗਈਆਂ, ना totally rural ने। मैं तो पंजाब दी villages ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ, ਤੇ ना totally urban ਹੋਈਆਂ ਨੇ। और इथों एक जरा यूथ है वो जाना शुरू हो गया बाहर, और बढ़िया ऐसिया विलेजेस ने जिन्होंने असी कहने हैं कि बेचराग हो गई ने, खाली हो गई ने, सारे छड़ के ही उन्होंने बाहर चले गए। So there's a lot of difference.
Yes, Gurpratap.
जी, so the एक क्वेश्चन जो सबसे पहले माइंड में ये आता है, that is regarding the title of the book. It's a very intriguing title, Dusk over the Mustard Fields. And it sounds like a metaphor for the narrative also. Would you like to elaborate upon this?
For me, when I think back, a very strong symbol of Punjab is the beautiful golden yellow acres and acres of mustard fields. So that is symbolic of Punjab. And why I talk of dusk is that I'm talking of a time when darkness slowly descended upon a happy Punjab, followed by a long, miserable night, which was 1947. That is why.
But would you like to accept this, that in actual, the book doesn't deal with dusk. The actual book actually deals with sunrise, because you have been able to bring together a Punjabi girl, Sikh girl with a Muslim boy. And I think during the partition, during those riotous times, when I think that girl was completely helpless and she was lost, and a Muslim boy picks her up and adopts her or takes her as his wife. I think it was in
that's a spoiler, Gurupdesh ji. That's a spoiler.
So that's a sunrise for the main character.
Ji.
Do you agree? Do you agree with that?
Gurupdesh ji, because ये nature का दस्तूर है कि हर शब की सहर भी होती है.
जी, जी.
We were talking about village life, and I think in many ways, I think you have been able to picture the kind of social stratification also in the villages in those days. Like, for example, you have used today it's a taboo term. Chamar, for example, is a taboo term today, but in those days, maybe people used it very frequently and openly. But you also talk about their separate quarters outside or somewhere on the fringes of the villages. That kind of stratification was there. Do you think that stratification still exists? We have that kind of thing in villages now?
Very unfortunately, it still exists.
Yeah.
And I have had it firsthand, because now I do not live in a village, but my daughter is here. She's with us right now in the audience. and she has been studying law in the Delhi University, and she narrated to me how firsthand she heard this from her own classmate from one of the villages. And I was shattered, and I felt awful and ashamed after hearing that incident.
Mhm.
ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਲੇ ਵੀ ਬੜਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦਾਖਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ from a certain disadvantaged category.
Okay.
That is what I've reproduced here in the book also.
Would you like to read some passages from your narrative for our
Definitely.
audience here, please?
Definitely. The Britishers were particular to recruit officers from desirable backgrounds, promoting elitism. Army jobs were much sought after by Jatsiks, who perceived themselves as a martial race upholding the spirit of bravery and sacrifice bestowed by Guru Gobind Singh upon the Khalsa. In need of soldiers for the war, the Britishers motivated them to join the army by bestowing jagirs or land endowments on them for loyalty and valor in battle, a great inducement for the land-loving Jats. Educated professional Jat boys were not easy to come by, and Nimu's family could hardly believe their luck in finding an army officer for her. Happy with the nice report, Nimu's parents did not feel the necessity to go and see him personally. Whoever did go looking at men's faces, it was a girl's good fortune if the man was good looking, but it was certainly not something that would affect his matrimonial prospects. Hukum Singh was 10 years older to her, but that was not a major concern. A popular Punjabi saying was that men and horses never grow old. Caste, family background, land holdings, job, and status, these were all that mattered. Nimmo was giddy with excitement. What glamour, what presence the Faujis had in their starched green uniforms, brass epaulets and shining brown leather boots, which went tuck-tuck when they walked. Chunni teri ve kalya kama, sone naal madama, ja akhi mere tol sipahi nu, main nit ausiyan pawa, odi khabar liya de kama, tenu kyo di churi pawa.
Thank you.
Yeah, baat. Wow.
Gurpratap.
This is a very strong passage that you have chosen to read, and certain questions have come to my mind from this passage itself. But before we go into these questions regarding feminism and more, I would like to ask you about the language of the book. This is a very Punjabi book set in Punjab of the pre-partition era. And you can tell at once that it is a Punjabi story. And yet the book you have written is in English. How did this happen? Why did you choose English for this Punjabi setup?
Gurpratap, I am ashamed to admit that I am not, I do think that I am not really very miserable in Punjabi, but I am not good enough to write literary Punjabi. So
Okay.
I have had to request another author to translate into this book into Punjabi, and it is also being done. And I am so very happy that mere paisa bethe Tariq paisa bhegene, that he volunteered to take on this task and translate it into Urdu too, which really will give a new life to this story. It has to be read on both sides of the Khardar Tars.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
let me just add here that the book has about, I think, 5 pages, quite nearly 200 word glossary given at the end. And there is a profusion of the words taken from Punjabi parlance, and they have been included in the English narrative. But then she has given a plenty of kind of, help at the back of the book. Despite this, I find there are many, many other words which have not been glossed. But my curiosity is that if there is so much of Punjabi in your narrative, did you imagine that your readers only would be Punjabi, or Did you think that your readers also would be from across other cultures who would be able to understand this?
I would very much hope that my readers would be from diverse cultures and areas, but you have raised a valid point. In my defense, I would say that I felt that there are so many expressions which are so unique to Punjabi culture that if I tried to put them in a translation, oh choot bolan vangu lagna si. And also, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮੇਰੀ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ characters ਦੀ conversation ਹੈ ਉਹ ਲਹਿਜ਼ਾ ਵੀ translation ਦੇ ਬਾਵਜੂਦ ਵੀ I've kept it a little Punjabi. You know, it doesn't read like a very English book. I'm aware of that also.
Yeah.
This is my defense.
This can be very enjoyable reading because you see a literal translation of a Punjabi phrase that is a typical Punjabi phrase, and you read a literal translation and then you start wondering कि अच्छा ये कौन सा वाला मुहावरा होगा. Because I remember खुशवंत सिंह की जो किताब थी Train to Pakistan, he had that phrase as of some place which was a literal translation of Gada kise thanda. And there are certain phrases, literal phrases in Punjabi that you have translated into English, and that makes for a very enjoyable reading. One can identify it once.
Yeah,
this is a Punjabi phrase.
Yeah, for example, you know, I can give you sister-in-law to blacken your face with. Apna muh kala kara rahi. Yes, there are a lot of these such literal translations, I think. Well, Tariq Mahmood ji, I think you have been tasked with translating this book into Urdu. What would be your take on it? What would you like to say?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me at this August forum and to share my thoughts and views. Let me straight away answer the question, what really impelled me to lay my hand on this book, first of all, and translation follows later on. Well, I'm a city bred, and to me, you know, the rural areas, I could only sort of see during my service, when I was in the field, in the civil service, I had an occasion to relate and interface with the villages and to understand the dynamics. And what really interested me in this novel was the kind of canvas and the kind of authenticity which I find, which is very rare, particularly considering the literature which is thrown up in the context of Punjab or Punjabi, and that too before the 1947, that is the pre-partition days. मेरा जो एक फेवरेट उर्दू में एक समझ लें कि शॉर्ट स्टोरी राइटर या नॉवेलिस्ट जिससे मैं बहुत एक मुतासर हूँ, इम्प्रेस हूँ. I've been writing for the last 40 years. Fiction is my domain and novel is my genre. It is Rajinder Singh Bedi, and he comes from an area. It was a confluence of my districts, Sialkot and Gujranwala. तो उसकी नावलों में और कहानियों में जो मज़ाफ़ाती फिज़ा है, मुझे यूँ लगी कि Dusk over the mustard field, यानी सरसों पर लहलहाती शाम, के यूँ लगा कि उसमें वो सारे एलिमेंट्स नज़र आए जो मुझे बेदी के यहाँ नज़र आते हैं. एक सिख फैमिली है, उसको उसने महवर बनाया. इसी तरह रंजीत ने to me, Sanyawal is a binary through which, you know, she throws up a larger picture as what kind of subcontinent was in the 40s. Or the portrait you find, you know, the kind of depiction, I could relate, I could empathize. मुझे यूँ लग रहा था कि as a field officer, perhaps I'm traveling through those lush green pastures and groves, नीम tree ने थे अपना किकर द दरख्त ने थे, rivulets ने थे, imposing minarets and, you know, and pulsating village life. दूसरी चीज जो मुझे ये एक तर्जुमे ये बात होती थी ज़मीन मैं उसका जिक्र करना चाहूँगा, and that is about the usage of many Punjabi words. I believe that is the strength of our content. You know, words like satta, vatta satta, syapa, बैठक मंजी पीरी जट्टी फौज हरामजादा. Now you see at times तर्जुमे में at times it becomes so difficult. You know, एक आपने एक source language से लेकर एक targeted language तक जाना है, तो आपको you got to be bilingual in the sense कि अगर आप खुद कर रहे हैं तो दोनों जुबानों पे आपको एक कमांड और महारत होनी चाहिए. और मुझे यूँ फील हुआ कि I have the knack and I have the capacity as a bilingual writer. Perhaps I could lay my hand on that. And when I shared with Dr. Powar my 3-4 chapters, which I could do, you know, in a book, so she was more or less एक हमारा एक satisfaction का level जो था, we were able to achieve. So I believe this is a transfusional process. Languages इसी तरह grow करती हैं. You got to have a stream of words. Like you know, हमारे अगर आप subcontinent की जुबान में समझें, कचहरी का लफ्ज मैं समझता था हमारी दादियाँ नानियाँ यूज करती थी, यार पंजाबी का लफ्ज है. श्रीलंका में गया कोई 80s में, मुझे पता लगा नो इट्स अ डच वर्ड और इट्स अ पोर्चुगीज वर्ड. बाल्टी, चाबी, यू नो, कमरा, कमीज. सो दीज आर हमारे देहातों में जाइए, they would own these words. So I believe this is something a very good experience and a very good innovation which has been seen and in this novel. और दूसरा ये लग रहा है मुझे कि the interesting is कि एक plots हैं, सब plots हैं, thematic content is very rich और stylistically भी ये लगा कि which flourish and ease. She's been able to write और जो craft मुझे नजर आ रहा है कि आपको एक village की understanding भी है और एक आप एक cantonment की जो corporate life है उसका भी experience है. And I believe to me she has the capacity to eternalize, you know, whatever she sees and make part of her, you know, a composite whole. And that's how she's been able to throw up, you know, different shades of the stories. तो मेरा ख्याल है कि कुछ आपके सवाल का जवाब तो मैं दे सका हूँ. I look forward to some more queries that you have.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Tariq ji. Thank you so much. Ranjit ji, regarding that passage that you read, I wanted to ask you about that. कि उसमें आपने एक पंजाबी बोली यूज की है, which is very popular, kama kama. And I, while reading the book, noticed that there is a lot of description of Punjabi rituals and ceremonies in the book, especially concerning the marriage ceremony. Vatna lagana hai, tel chona hai, ये सारी बातें, शगन गाने हैं. So I wanted to ask you, ये वैसे ही descriptive है कि is it a conscious effort on your part to document these ceremonies? क्योंकि ये आजकल पंजाब से तो गायब होती जा रही हैं. जो नई जनरेशन है उनको ये सब मालूम भी नहीं है. They have to ask the elder generation कि ये सारा कुछ क्या है. So I wanted to ask, was it a conscious effort on your part?
Vatna has been replaced by a beautician now.
Gurpratap, you're very right. I wanted to document the ceremonies and the social and cultural ethos of those times. In fact, I will share with you that the first draft of my book was more engrossed in that. And then I had to, in fact, change it a little and increase the story part also, because I thought maybe it was getting to be too much like a research paper. So definitely I wanted to document those.
Okay. So, but this is a book that we now call faction, you know, fact and fiction. When they combine, you get faction.
Yes, I would also think that it could be historical fiction.
Okay.
And yes. You know.
And of course, the events are true. And I believe certain characters in the book are also inspired from real life characters.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely inspired by true characters and also true episodes in their lives.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Sir, over to you. The next question.
Dr. Ranjit, I think since we are talking about those old days, and it's quite natural to find in your narrative a very heavy dose of patriarchy. You have made very dominating male characters whose world actually, carries in their household and even across other areas. Women have been shown as subjugated, silenced. They have little say in the household, also in other matters too. why do you think, you probably wanted to project patriarchy as one of the major themes in your book?
How much ever nostalgic we might be about the gone by years, how much ever we might fondly remember those times, we cannot deny that there were some social aberrations and evils which were really very, very damaging to certain sections of society, and patriarchy was one of them. And the whole story about my main character Nimmo, most of her woes come out of patriarchy, communalism. So this goes on till the very end, and I did want to touch it, and also about how then slowly they were, by the end of the book, that there were some changes in hopeful changes in the era which started showing up in later in and she finds a voice, and how the women started finding a voice, and even her co-wife, she also finds a voice.
But what I find most interesting, though of course it is realistic, I know, that even the women, elderly women in your fiction, also try to silence young women. I mean, something that is kind of, internalized oppression in those elderly women. And they have also accepted the paternal way of life, and they are dictating same kind of things or terms to the young girls. Are you critical of this, or do you think it was just the urge of being more realistic that you depicted it the way it was?
Gurupdesh, you have made a very important and correct observation. Patriarchy could not have carried on unless women internalized it. And this was a very vicious circle. They were in very many ways captives of a certain social given thinking. They were straitjacketed into thinking like that and conforming to it, and they helped older generations of women helped propagate patriarchy because their very survival depended on it. Their approval by the men depended on it.
Yeah, but there is another streak to the same question of patriarchy, that at times you are critical of all this, and that probably is born out of your feminist stance. Is that a part of your, thinking, that you wanted some women to speak up, or some women to kind of resist this patriarchy, and you wanted to be critical about all this because you believe that women should be given an equal opportunity?
Gurupdeshi, I do not really think that isms are something I need to describe my thought process with. If you want to call it feminism, fine. But for me, freedom for every human person, whether it is a woman or a LGBTQ or a disadvantaged class, is sacred. And yes, I did want to speak about it, about the freedom that was denied to women here, mainly.
Yes.
I also have a question regarding the portrayal of women, whether you want to talk about feminism or gender inequality or whatever, because there is a very strange description of the power that women hold in the book. Hansa, she's educated, she completes her education, but she finds it impossible to find a suitable man for her. And she has to settle for a man who's already married. Nimmo is not allowed to study, to pursue her studies because her mother says कि इससे फिर शादी कौन करेगा, you know. And they are both beaten and sexually exploited also in their own household. So how do you think things have changed now? Even though this is a historical fiction, do you think it is still relevant, everything that we have said in the book?
I think that there are certain sections which have moved on, the certain privileged sections, and India and even Pakistan, as Tariq Bhai would also maybe, support me here, that there are certain sections which are still living in the 1940s. उन्होंने दे लिए खास कुछ बदलिया नहीं है. और दूसरी गल है कि exploitation दी शक्ल बदल गई है. Who knows, ज़्यादा subtle हो गया है, ज़्यादा hidden हो गया है. But I do think that the spirit of my message is still very relevant, because women are still exploited continue to be exploited in many ways, inside and outside the home.
Yes, I think your story very vividly portrays two major incidents, in which the mighty Sardar exploits his own maid servant, and then of course the main character Nemo gets exploited by another relative in the family. These things probably show, and you never kind of appreciate these things. Your tone tells that you are not very happy with this. That probably conforms to what you are saying. But then at the same time, we also see another evil, which was probably more prevalent in those days, but I think it still is there, that you have targeted a number of swamis and those sadhus and the jantar mantar people, those who kind of give you some kind of totkas to relieve you of your problems, and all the time you have shown them in bad light. You think they are always wrong, or there are some people who still have such such a power?
What should I say about that? I do wish they had some supernatural powers and could make this world a better place. How I wish so.
Yeah.
तारिक जी, आप कुछ कहना चाह रहे थे?
मैं ये कहना चाह रहा था कि ये आई बिलीव, जैसे मैंने पहले भी कहा है, कि यूँ लगता है कि Ranjit has been able to internalize, many of the ethos of the 40s. मुमकिन है इन्होंने अपने बड़ों से चीजें सुनी हो, क्योंकि यही चीज एक चादर मैली सी जो रंजीत से बेटी का नॉलेज है उसमें नजर आती है जी। उसमें यही चीजें नजर आती हैं आपको, ये विच क्राफ्ट नजर आता है, टूना नजर आता है, एंड इस किस्म का इतकादी नजर आती है. तो दिस मस्ट बी द प्रेवलेंट नॉर्म, एंड इवन इट इज आज के दौर में भी इवन वी कांट रूल आउट. People are there, पाकिस्तान में कुछ साल पहले स्कैंडल हुआ था कि डबल शाह, कि वो पैसे दुगने कर देता है और लाइन लगी हुई है लोगों की. ये कि एक फिक्शन राइटर ने उस चीज को उठाया और उसको फिक्शनलाइज किया है. I mean, that's a new kind of awareness you are bringing through this medium. That's what my thought was.
Yes, Gurpratap.
Well, I was going to talk about, since we have touched the issue of internalizing a woman's pain and her agony in society, I was going to ask you about how much did it help you being a woman in writing this story?
Oh, tremendously.
Oh,
I think it helped me tremendously, because how much ever we might empathize with another section of people, whatever, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੱਕ ਜ਼ਾਤੀ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਗੱਲ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ. ਸੋ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੁਣ ਹਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਮੈਂ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੈ, whether it is about the travails of a woman, and if you also realize कि ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ I have not really made her through and through a very good person. She's very human. Nemo is very human.
Yeah.
She does, try to do things in her defense later. She does try to try out little subterfuges, because that is the reality of what women have been trying to do just to survive.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
She resolves.
Can I? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was, in fact, I found it in many novels of, say, old times, and I found it in your novel also. The way destiny works. I think most of the people in your novel, they believe in fate and destiny. that sometimes takes away their own will to act. And this is not in your novel. I think I found it in Gurpratap Singh's novels, also in many other novels, where people simply resign to this kind of fate. Do you subscribe to this kind of philosophy or ideology, or would you like to say that your characters must take responsibility of their own action, then they should go ahead and do something to make their fate, different?
I do not subscribe to it at all.
Good.
But I was trying to capture the thought, the beliefs of that time, a time when most of them were uneducated or educated to very low level, to the prevalent thought process of what was taught to them by the Babe also, by the religious leaders also. That was the thought process and that was the reality of those times. Unfortunately, a lot of people still continue with let destiny lead the way. So I do not subscribe to it at all.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I think this is the requirement. I think I would like you to write the next time a piece of narrative where you show that people make their own destiny, or young women, they kind of carve their own careers or their own destiny. Good. Yes. Gurpratap.
Well, I think all too soon we have come to the end of this session because it's already past 6:45 and we still have to get questions from the audience also.
Yeah, but I think before we ask the audience, we will like her to tell us the kinds of authors she likes to read, and what are those people who have influenced her thinking, her writing, and the way she has kind of built this or structured this story. What are her models of
Uh, I would say that in this novel, I cannot say that I have really borrowed any thoughts or had any source of inspiration from, except I think one partially I can say Dilip Kaur Tibana's Ho Hamara Jeevna, and I have read plenty more books of her. But otherwise, the authors that I read and admire is Chomsky.
Oh.
That is.
How do you find Chomsky in this novel?
And well, I have also read and thought about Ayn Rand, Leonores, about, so I'm talking more about the fictions that I'd read, but otherwise I read history a lot, frankly.
Okay, that's very nice.
Not as much fiction, but I am an avid reader. My next book that I'm writing is also historical fiction.
Okay. Yeah, but at the same time, I would just like to know from you, was there any particular, say, message that you wanted to pass on to readers by uniting these cross-religious, people as a couple? There's a Sikh girl who's already married and who has already given birth to a child, and she is, married to a Muslim boy, and who also converts her to Muslim Islam, I think. So, any particular message that you wanted to give, or any particular comment that you would like to make about partition resulting into these things?
This last bit that you said about conversion is a bit of a counter message. This is not a message that I would like to give, but I know at that time, in that age, it would be inevitable. This is addressing reality, not about, but one message is basically that I wanted to give is what I started with, that hatred, communalism, chasms, because of caste, community, religion, will lead us only to devastation. And what our culture teaches us, Tariq Bhai can also quote, I'm sure, from what he thinks, but the quote that occurs to me is, Manas ki zaat sab ek hai pehchan.
Yes, Gurpratap, you can, go ahead with questions if there are any.
All right, on that lovely thought, we would like to end this discussion now, and we can take up questions from the audience, because I'm pretty sure there are plenty of questions and they're already in the chat. So the first question is from Sumneet. As there are innumerable pieces of literature dealing with partition already, how confident or insecure were you about the acceptance of your work?
Frankly, I was not insecure because it all came from the heart. And this is not really only a narrative about the partition. It has different facets. It talks about the British Indian Army. It talks about the life of a woman. It talks about the what rural life was at that particular time. So I hope I don't sound too confident, but there was no insecurity.
Okay, thank you. And another question is from Ritika. Would you throw some light on your writing process?
I began with first recording oral narratives. Then I went and, of course, I dug up old books. I read up about them because I could not always trust my memory. I fell back on episodes that my Bibiji told me. I fell back on episodes that my father, who was also very well read and a wonderful storyteller, that he would narrate from his experiences in the army. So in addition to that, then I dug up books and I read up and I transported myself into those times. And then I started writing and rewriting and redrafting and redrafting many times.
Okay. I have just thought of another question while listening to this answer, but I will read a question from Samya Singh. As an author who has beautifully dwelled into emotional complexities of human relationship, which does she feel is more painful, unrequited love or love that didn't find culmination?
Samya Singh happens to be my daughter.
Okay.
And it's a difficult question, really. It may differ from one person to another, but I think having loved and lost is very painful. If you don't know something, maybe you have not really lost it that way.
So the question I thought of while listening to your answer was that given your particular background, that your grandfather was in the army, he served in the British Army.
My father.
Your father, sorry. And your mother was from a Punjabi village. So did you find yourself especially privileged to write this story? And was it the basis why you put Hukam Singh into the army?
Yes, I did. My grandfather was a Zeldar, but my mother was educated, luckily, so that helped me. She gave me accounts of their childhood, the Rath, traveling in a Rath, riding to school. All this came from her narratives. So it definitely helped me tremendously. That's true.
And if your father had not been in the army, would Hukam Singh have been into some other profession?
I can't say that as a, I mean, kya slaan wali gal hai, so I don't know.
All right. Thank you so much for the wonderful session. Okay, Kamal has an observation that it is very sad to find that a rich culture is disappearing from our villages. So it's not really a question, but an observation. Your take on this?
Kamal, I think that's very relevant what you have said. And culture ਦੇ ਕਈ ਪਹਿਲੂ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਉਹਦੀ ਇੱਕ ਪਹਿਲੂ ਹੈਗੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਬਾਨ ਔਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਇੱਕ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਗੁਜ਼ਾਰਿਸ਼ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਕਰਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨ ਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਾ ਰੱਖੀਏ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਸ਼ਖਸੀਅਤ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਖਾਸ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨ ਨੂੰ ਗਵਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਹੋਂਦ ਨੂੰ ਧੁੰਦਲਾ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ it's very good ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਾਕੀ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨਾਂ ਸਿੱਖੀਏ ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਸਿੱਖੀਏ पर ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ਬਾਨ ਤੋਂ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ਾਤ ਤੋਂ ਸ਼ਰਮਿੰਦਾ ਨਾ ਹੋਈਏ ਅੱਜਕੱਲ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਬੜਾ ਅਹਿਸਾਸ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ
Well,
What could be the reason for this? I mean, we all observe this, we all see this, and lots of people speak from high pedestals that we should retain our mother tongue, we should retain our native languages. But I think this is not happening. So why is it so?
कुछ globalization इतनी ज़्यादा हो गई. So many people are going abroad, settling there. ਤੇ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਇਹ ਦੂਸਰੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਬਾਨਾਂ ਜਾਣਨੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਮਾੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਪਰ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਛੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ਬਾਨ ਨਾਲ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਹਾਂ
ਜੀ I understand that. I have experienced that.
So that's exactly what I had in mind. But I was thinking that if we have to raise the status of our own language, then we have to produce great writers, great thinkers in our own language who probably can give us a lead. And I think, do you think there is a paucity of good writers in Punjabi for that matter? That will be probably outside the scope of this discussion.
Absolutely, Gurupdesh ji, there is a paucity of good writers in Punjabi. ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਦਰੁਸਤ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਹੀ ਘੱਟ ਹੈਗੇ ਹਾਂ ਜ਼ਬਾਨ ਤੇ ਲਿਖਾਂਗੇ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ so yes
and I think some people have written here, they have made this comment that because lots of young people from our villages, they are migrating to other countries because of economic reasons. So that could also be one of the reasons why they don't speak their own language. Sarabjot has sent in a question. In the creative process of writing this novel, out of the person, feminist, psychiatrist, and author, who gets to have the final word? You are all these, the person, feminist, psychiatrist, and author, who gets to have the final word? Or how do you resolve the conflict among all the split roles in favor of truth and objectivity?
I think I wouldn't call them split roles. I would say that they are all, it's a fusion of all, they all go together to make the whole.
And Lalita JS has also made this observation. This evening reminds me of my mother, from whom I heard up-teen stories of Pakistan. Great work, Ranjit, congratulations. There are lots of people who have complimented you on your work, and I think, and your talk, she was one of them. You're right, I think. Do you think mothers also tell the stories the way grandmothers or our mothers used to tell stories at bedtime? I have heard lots of stories from my father when I was young, because we had this kind of, community sleeping spaces over on the roofs. So we heard these stories. Do mothers also tell stories these days?
Well, grandmothers do. I am a grandmother to two small boys, and the elder is just 5 years old, and I'm waiting for him to grow up a little so that I can start narrating the village stories to him. But few simple ones I try to tell him.
Okay, because in those days people used to tell stories to, pass on some kind of an instruction to the young people, and maybe nowadays mothers or parents they don't want to kind of impose themselves on children, so they don't tell those instructive stories.
I think parents will be parents. You can never stop them from instructing. Whether children listen or not is a different thing.
We are almost out of time, but we'll take up one last question from Umar. He's asking, how does the current generation, which doesn't have as such an organic connection with the partition, can relate with your work or that historic event?
Umar, if you talk to your family, I think every family, especially in Punjab and other North Indian areas, directly or indirectly, they have been impacted by partition. And even those who have not been directly affected, if you are an avid reader and you have read about the devastation and the horrific nightmare that this area went through, you cannot help but be shaken by it. For example, we are not directly connected with what the Jews went through during the Holocaust. But then that is something that has impacted us terrifically. Those who are feeling human beings and who have read about it, this is something that happened at home.
All right, thank you so much. And we have a message from Vishwa Raksha. Many congratulations, Dr. Powar. This has motivated me to read the book. I look forward to reading it soon.
Thank you.
And thank you for this wonderful and delightful conversation. It was really nice talking to you. And I would like to now call upon Mrs. Nayyar. Mrs. Nayyar?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm waiting. Adab, walaikum pranam. Mera naam Jasmeet Nayyar hai. I'm one of the executives and the founder members of Maja House. So today, it's a sterling presentation, I must say. I must admit. And Ranjit ji, मैं तोड़ी की तारीफ करा, तोड़े मन दी, ते तोड़े दिमाग दी, किस तरह तुसी नवे पुराने उधेड़ बुन्नू, किन्ना वधिया लिख मारिया. And the British Indian Army, जिस दा हिस्सा घरों शुरू होया, ते सानेवाल दियां हवेलियां, ते परिवार, ते पिंडां च विचरण वालियां, उच्चियां नीचियां जातां दे बंदे, उन्हां दा असर साडी जिंदगी ते जो तुहाडे अकॉर्डिंगली अज भी चल रहे हैं. गल ठीक है. ते फिर वो रवायती रीति रिवाज, रस्मां, रहन बहन, नलियां वाले बच्चे, खुरक वाले कुत्ते, तुसी कुछ भी नहीं छोड़िया. हवा, पानी, खूह, गुड़ दा स्वाद. It was interesting. ते फिर कच्ची उम्र दी चाहत, निम्मो ते अख्तर मुंडा. Come on, so beautifully done. ते फिर जिंदगी दी सच्ची सच्चाई ते कड़वाहट, नामंजूर ते रद्द होने वाली निम्मो. Total somersault of dreams and aspirations and rejections at the hand of Hukam Singh. Beautiful. Tariq Muhammad Saab, तुहाडी मुबारक चाहत.
Tariq Mahmood.
Thank you. इस विरसे को उर्दू च तर्जुमा सानेवाल वर्गे होर पिंडां दे नवे पुराने दिलां तक तुसी पहुंचाओगे. It's a big effort and a big compliment the way you are doing it. We are enamored that you are translating it to Urdu. A very interactive session forward by Gurupdesh and Gurpratap. I extend my heartfelt thanks to the Maja House team who's been working hard to bring it out to all our viewers and friends. And thank you to all our friends who joined us today. Remain in touch. Do keep the good word. And we will ask you to join us again tomorrow for a very interactive session. Mere vallo saira nu alvida, rab rakha dosto, and over to Arvinder Chamak to give you the details of the further programs.
Thank you so very much indeed. In a खूबसूरत session, मैं ਇਹਦੇ ਤਰਮੀਮ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ. ਮੈਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੰਨੀ ਗੁਜ਼ਾਰਿਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਕਰੀਏ ਤੇ ਐਟਲੀਸਟ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਮਾਂ ਬੋਲੀ 'ਚ ਕਰੀਏ. ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਇਸ ਸੈਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਾਰਟਿਸਪੈਂਟਸ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਜੋਏ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਸਾਡੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੀ, ਆਪਣੇ ਦਰਦ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਸੀ. ਔਰ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਜੀ, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ. ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਚੈਪਟਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ 'ਚ ਆਏ. ਅਸੀਂ ਉਮੀਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕੋਵਿਡ ਦੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਠੀਕ ਹੋਏ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੈਠਕਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਲਾਹੌਰ, ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ, ਚੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਲ ਪਾਈਏ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਾਂਝਾਂ ਨੇ, ਪਿਆਰ ਦੇ ਪੁਲ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਮੁਹੱਬਤਾਂ ਬਣ ਕੇ ਬਰੇ ਸਗੀਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਚਾਨਣ ਵੰਡ ਸਕਣ.
ਰੱਬ ਕਰੇ.
ਤਾਰਿਕ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਦਿਲ ਦੀਆਂ ਗਹਿਰਾਈਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ. ਔਰ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੋਂ ਜੁੜੇ ਨੇ, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ ਔਰ ਇਨਸ਼ਾਅੱਲਾ ਤਾਲਾ ਕੱਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਫੇਰ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਸ਼ਾਮੀ 6 ਵਜੇ। ਕੱਲ ਗੱਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ ਦੀ ਇੱਕ ਬੜੀ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਸਨੂੰ ਗੁਰਮੀਤ ਰਾਏ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਗੁਰਮੀਤ ਰਾਏ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਸ ਪੂਰੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੱਲ ਸ਼ਾਮੀ 6 ਵਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਬਾਰੇ, ਅਸਕੀ ਇਨ ਰਿਮੈਂਬਰੈਂਸ। ਗੁਰਮੀਤ ਰਾਏ, ਉਰਵਸ਼ੀ ਬਤਾਲੀਆ, ਜਿਗਨਾ ਦਸਈ ਔਰ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਰਬਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਇਸ ਸੈਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਮੋਡਰੇਟ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਕੱਲ ਸ਼ਾਮੀ 6 ਵਜੇ। ਔਰ ਇਨਸ਼ਾਅੱਲਾ ਤਾਲਾ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਡਾ ਅੱਗੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਗਸਤ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਪੂਰਾ ਪੈਕ ਹੈ ਅੱਛੇ ਇਵੈਂਟਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਅੱਛੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਡੈਲੀਬ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੋਣਗੀਆਂ। ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਸੈਪਟੈਂਬਰ ਅਕਤੂਬਰ 'ਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਂਝੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਕੰਪਲੀਟ ਨਿਰੋਲ ਫੈਸਟੀਵਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਖੁਆਇਸ਼ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਐਸਪੈਕਟਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲਿਟਰੇਚਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨੇ, ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨੇ, ਆਰਕੀਟੈਕਚਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨੇ, ਸਾਡੇ ਕਾਮਰਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨੇ, ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਬੌਂਡਸ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਉੱਤੇ ਚਰਚਾ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਪੋਇਟਰੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਸੋ ਤਦ ਤੱਕ ਲਈ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ, ਸ਼ਬਾ ਖੈਰ, ਰੱਬ ਰਾਖਾ, ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਵਸਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਤੇ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਲਈ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹੋ। ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ।
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody. And please join us tomorrow.
Yeah.
Arvinder ji ne aapko bataya about the session that we have tomorrow.
Yeah. Good night.